Hi, and welcome back. In the last video, we discussed how lectures work in my flipped classrooms and my design principles for screencasting. In the next two videos, you and I are going to get under the hood, as it were, and look at the nuts and bolts for how these screencasts are made. So we're going to see the technical side of making screencasts using the pedagogical principles we discussed in the first video as a guide to selecting and using our tools. Now, the tools that I use and the workflow that I follow depend pretty heavily upon what I want to accomplish. So I already mentioned before that I make basically two kinds of screencasts. One is simply a recording of what you might see in a traditional stand-up lecture, where I have slides going in the background and I'm talking while displaying the slides. I call this kind of screencast the talking head screencast. That's what you're viewing right now, and that's what this video is going to show how to make. The other kind of screencast is where I'm working a problem out at the board, except for me, it's not at the board, but on a computer screen, doing work by hand and narrating my thoughts as I write. I call those the working example screencasts because I usually use them in my math classes to work out examples as I would do on the board in a traditional lecture class, and that's going to be the focus of the next video. Now, before I do anything else, let me emphasize that what you're about to see here is just one way of doing things. It's the result of an evolutionary process that's been going on for me ever since I made my first screencast about 6 years ago. It's not perfect or even necessarily optimal, and different people have different processes. And if you have a way of making screencasts that works for you that's different than the way I do it, or if you spot something that can improve my process, then that is awesome, and you should definitely go right over to the community discussion boards for this MOOC and post about it. I'll be over there myself to answer questions and to cheer you on. So moving on, the goal of the talking head screencast is basically to give a slide presentation like you might see at a conference. Keeping in mind the framework for screencasting, that is, keeping it simple, short, real, and good, we want to make a presentation that maintains focus on one idea, goes into depth and gives insight on that idea, and lasts maybe 5 or 6 minutes and has very good quality audio and visuals. Here is my basic process for doing this. Step 0 in this process, before anything else happens, is to go outline the presentation I want and to make and plan out what I want to happen and when. This is just like you would do for any conference presentation or traditional classroom lecture, so there's nothing really much to say about that. Then, once I have the outline, step 1 is to write out a complete script for what I want to say. That means after I've outlined the screencast, I'm going to get out my trusty text editor, type out and then edit what I want to say with the intent of following that script to the letter. Now, this may not be like how you approach conference presentations or classroom lectures. It's certainly not the way that I speak at conferences, by reading verbatim off of a script. But for screencasting, there are advantages to having a fixed script and sticking to it, which I'll discuss in a moment. So step 2, once I have the script, I'm going to record the audio of me reading the script. For this, I use 3 special tools. One of them is just my laptop. Another is a piece of software called Audacity. It's a free and open source audio processing tool. It's very easy to do simple things in Audacity, like record a voice, but you can also do amazingly complicated things with it as well, and it's free. The third tool that I use is my microphone. Now, I've mentioned before that bad video can often be forgiven in a screencast, but bad audio is almost impossible to put up with. So I make sure to use a high-quality microphone to do all my voice recording. Personally, for me, I use this one called a Blue Yeti. This will set you back about $120 at Amazon, but for me, this is money very well spent because the Blue Yeti has excellent sound quality and it can be used for a variety of recording purposes like podcasts or recording interviews or even recording music. It just plugs into the USB port on my computer, so it's extremely easy to set up and use. If you don't have the money or the inclination to buy something like the Blue Yeti, I recommend just a simple USB headset microphone like this one, which you can typically buy for about $35, and it'll be a big improvement over your computer's internal microphone. So I'm using these 3 tools to record my voice, reading back the script word for word. You might be wondering why I'm doing this and not recording my voice at the same time I'm playing back the slides. There are 3 reasons for this. First, reading from an edited script helps to keep it good, as we've seen before, by removing all these vocal mannerisms like and ah, or sudden improvisations that we're often prone towards when we're doing a live lecture. Secondly, reading from an edited script helps keep it short because, for one thing, we've removed all the vocal mannerisms and diversions, and by editing, we've created a very tight focus for the presentation. And third, by splitting the task of recording a screencast into two separate processes, one for recording audio and the other for recording visuals, as I'm going to discuss next, we're actually going to simplify the process because we're performing two separate but much simpler processes rather than one process that requires me to do two things at the same time, namely talk and present. I've done personal experiments with doing screencasts where I record both the audio and visual simultaneously without a script on the one hand, and then go back and redo them as separate processes with a script. And you'd think that it would be much more work to use separate processes. But consistently in those experiments, the separate process approach with a script yields screencasts that are about 25% shorter. It's the same educational quality and content amount, but 3/4 of the length. And it took actually less time because I had to do less editing post-production. So again, I highly recommend this process of recording your voice separately before you record any visuals. Now, the actual recording of the voice is really easy. I just plug in my USB microphone, open up Audacity, make sure the microphone is selected as the standard input, get my script in front of me, and then click record and start reading. When I'm done, I click stop and then export the audio file to something like a WAV file to a directory that holds the audio. That's the audio side. Now let's talk about the visual side. First of all, I'm going to use my favorite presentation tool to create slides, just like you would for a talk or a traditional lesson. Since I use a lot of math, I tend to use the LaTeX typesetting language to make slides, particularly using the Beamer package. Of course, you can also use PowerPoint or Apple's Keynote software. LaTeX outputs the slides as a big PDF file, and I actually recommend that even if you're using PowerPoint or Keynote, that you export the files to PDFs rather than use the native formatting because they're just easier to work with. Once the slides are made up, here's where the real work of recording begins. So first, I'm going to open my screencasting software. This is the most important tool in the screencasting toolbox, and there are many different pieces of software out there for doing this. My go-to software is called Camtasia for Mac. It's made by TechSmith Incorporated, and it can do really almost anything you want it to do, and it's very easy to do simple things. Again, there are other tools for screencasting out there, such as Snagit, which is another TechSmith product, or Screencast-O-Matic, which is a free web-based tool, and many more, and you should just play around and hunt around until you find one that you like. Anyway, for me, I'm going to open up Camtasia. I'm not going to get into the details of how Camtasia works, but suffice it to say that you can put objects you want to record in this area for assets and then drag them onto this timeline down here. The first thing I'm going to do is import the audio file I made of me reading the script. Then I'm going to drag it onto the timeline and put maybe a 5 to 10 second delay at the front of this for reasons that we'll explain in a moment. Then I'm going to put the playhead all the way back at the very beginning of the timeline. Next, I'm going to locate my PDF file that has the slides in it, and I'm going to make sure that I've set it so that when I press the left-right arrow keys, the slides will advance. Now I'm going to tell Camtasia to record the window where these slides occur. Now that I've selected the region to record, I'm going to click the record button, and then Camtasia will give me a quick countdown before the recording starts. Once the recording starts, I'm going to press play on the Camtasia timeline. This is going to begin a playback of the audio starting about 5 to 10 seconds before my speaking starts. In that 5 to 10 second period, I need to get everything out of the way of the window that I'm going to record with Camtasia. Then, once the audio starts playing back, I'm simply going to advance the slides as I listen to the voiceover. This way, I'm only doing one thing, advancing slides. Otherwise, all I'm doing is listening to me talk. Once the audio is done and I've advanced all the way through the presentation, all I have to do is trim off the delay at the beginning where I was preparing the screen for recording, and I have a presentation with audio read from a script where the visuals are in sync with the audio. Once the recording is done, I'm going to do two things. First, I make sure to save the file. That's important. Then I'm going to upload the file to our department's YouTube channel, and I can do that directly from within Camtasia. Then I'm done. I can go into the YouTube channel later and add some metadata like tags or geolocation information if I want to. Now, I just want to end by saying this is only one way of doing things. If you want to make screencasts, then you should absolutely experiment with tools and workflows that work for you and for your students, and don't just copy me. In the third and final video, I'll discuss a similar workflow for creating worked examples videos that involves an iPad.